Yeah, it was
Yeah.
wild.
Right. Okay. I remember it was your birthday now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was
Yeah.
100% worth it. It was wonderful. It was so good to get to know you and to be able to kind of delve into the band history. And I'm ecstatic anytime you have music come out. So it's so good to see new material coming out.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
And what an appropriate name for an album coming out of this period that we've all lived through. Everything is going to be okay. Was that kind of hedged on the idea of where we were and where we're at now? How did that work?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, there's a few reasons for it, really. The first one really was because it was the name of there's a track on the album with that name as well as the album. So when we were writing that track, it started with a bass line and a melody idea, sort of a vague melodic idea that is in the tune. And that's all I had for that. So I took it to Chris in the studio and he came up with like the muted piano part to that. And immediately we know when we think it's a good idea. So it's like, let's try and just demo it. We'll record it and then come back to it as we do with all these things. So we've got the little fragment. And all the tracks need a name just so we can reference it. And usually a lot of the working titles are quite silly. But Chris just said, what should we call it? And there's a sticker on my bass amplifier that's been there for a number of years. It was put there by a sound engineer that we used to work with a lot, like 5, 6 years ago, maybe. And he'd stuck it on my amp. It just says everything's going to be okay. So I said, let's call it that. And then we'll come back to it. And so a lot of the working titles don't really stick, but that one everybody really liked. And then there was a lot of things going on where it felt very fitting to have that sort of sense of reassurance from it. So then people were like, well, management and everybody was like, have you considered naming the album that? And funnily enough, I had been thinking maybe this would be a good name for the album. So that's the first reason why. But also, as time went on, it became more poignant. A lot of stuff happened, certainly the COVID thing happened, a lot of tragic personal circumstances happened, and it just felt like a very sort of reassuring sense of hope, really, trying to, even if it's not true that things, no one can ever say things are going to be okay and really mean it, but it comes from a sense of hope and reassurance. And I think everybody kind of needs that at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I noticed when this began and as we kept going through this COVID period, every once in a while people would just kind of stop and say, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. So I think that's the thing that kind of resonated with me. And even the artwork with all the birds and the soft blues and all of that, it just kind of made sense. So I'm curious, let's kind of go back a little bit when all this began, because we literally talked kind of on the precipice of this whole thing starting. How did you all do? How did you, what, obviously everything fell away in March, but as time kind of marched on and we undulated, everything opened, then went back closed. How did you all do?
It was a very strange time, as it was for everyone, but for the band, because we had the last album lined up to come out that year, and loads of touring, loads of dates were ready. And then obviously everything got pulled, and it was like, well, we'll still release the album. We've never done that where we just release an album and it just goes out there and there's no gigs, there's nothing. And that was kind of strange, but I think initially it was quite good from a personal point of view, because it gave us time to, it sort of forced us to stop. And I think we needed that. We were very, very busy, and we were just kept going and kept going, and we're in the touring albums, cycle. And I think it gave us time to reflect on some things and be at home. And unfortunately, it gave us time to look at some stuff. And with Rob, our ex-drummer, and he wanted to go off, and it wasn't really working on either side, and I think it was better that he went. So it gave us time to figure a lot of stuff out. And as I said, there was some personal circumstances. I lost like my mum and my brother. Not I lost my mum during the COVID times, and my brother 8 months later when we were writing this album. So that's why it's got a lot of personal meaning. They both died of cancer. So it I think in some ways it was kind of good that we had time to sort things out and reflect and start afresh. But it was a very weird time. I mean, no musician likes to be off the road for that for that long, really.
I got the feeling, and I ramped up my interviews more than I ever did before during that time. Unbeknownst to me, it just happened that way. And I got the feeling with a lot of big musicians, big fish out there in the world, whether it's jazz or otherwise, really needed this time to be reflective because things just go at such a pace that you can't keep up. And even look at nature. I mean, the Venice Canal cleared up, the air in Beijing cleared up. It's like there's levels of metaphor that went into this. Things had to just stop and have a moment. So I'm curious, with that being said, from a creative standpoint, having a minute to breathe, how did that infuse this new album and new material from an artistic standpoint?
Um, it's when the lockdown kicked in, we had a lot of stuff to figure out, so we weren't initially that like being creative. I think it was a bit of a break for us, but I think it's like anything where you need a break and then you come back fresh, you can sort of reassess and have a sort of perspective that's a little bit, you can take a step back and look at everything. So I think once we got back to doing stuff, we did an EP called Between Two Waves that came out last year. And that was the first stepping stone of really being able to try out some new stuff. And it gave us a perspective of like, well, let's just go for it. A lot of these things we hadn't been sure about whether to try or not. We'd always said we were going to do the acoustic thing, trying to emulate electronic stuff, but it's like maybe it's time to try and play. Play with synthesizers. We're getting more interested in that world and what it could bring, and so that EP was a real stepping stone for the album, and it just gave us a chance to enjoy it more and be playful and try different ideas. And if nobody liked it, then well, that's the way it goes, and we move on. But I think it was that, just giving a bit of a sense of we've become quite self-conscious about everything we were doing and worried about the outside perspective. And I think it's like, let's just try and have fun with it again. And then also the album was an extension of that.
So another part of this, there's the artist and then there's the audience, the fans, those that are consuming this. What's your feeling been from the audience, from the people out there? I mean, have you noticed a level of appreciation, attentiveness, something that's different than before this happened?
For like the concerts or the albums or
Well, probably just more live, just from what you're feeling, the energy off the stage, and even from the response that you're getting from this album. Is it different?
for the album, yeah, I feel like people they almost feel like they're re-engaging with us. I feel like people knew us from a while back, and then they're sort of coming back to this album. You sort of see a few things on the socials, and the fan response to it has been really, really good, which I'm so grateful for, because it really means a lot, this one. Not that they all don't mean a lot, but it feels very sort of personal and poignant. So that's been good. And for getting back live, it was just a phenomenal feeling to finally do it. We had a gig last year in March. We did a hometown show in Manchester, and I think that's one of my favorite gigs we've ever done, because it just felt like the atmosphere in the room. We've always said that doing a gig is like a two-way thing. It's not just about us as a band, it's about the band and the audience, and the interaction and the feeling of togetherness. And that was a really good gig that sort of demonstrated that. You felt like everyone was so happy that live music had come back, and we were back doing it, and it just, the feeling in the room was sort of palpable, really.
So every time I talk to a group or musicians at this point, you've already moved past this. I mean, so to speak, you're on to the next thing. So what is like, how's everything going with live shows and the world opening up? And we're hitting the warmer months. We're in a new year. How are you all feeling? How are you feeling going into this new album, live shows? What's going on?
Really good. We just come back from a US tour. So we did I say US, I mean it's so big, obviously some places got missed out, but we did like, West Coast and then Minneapolis and East Coast. So that's the first gigs we've done with a lot of this new material. So it's really clicked into place, you know, like this whole new thing, a lot of the new technology we're using, and with John on the drums, and we just finished in New York last Saturday, and we're in Brooklyn, and I was really happy with everything. So I feel like we're in a really good space. I feel like live we're getting better and better all the time, and everybody's just got the levels of enthusiasm within the group, and the audiences seem to be loving it. So I couldn't really ask for much more, to be honest.
You know, the one thing I was thinking when this happened is a lot of musicians that were trying to make it out there had to abandon ship and had to find other cities to live in, other things to do. But it seems as though, especially in the world of jazz, it's stronger than ever. There's more people in school, more musicians are after it. Are you getting the sense from a creative community standpoint that things are just as strong, if not stronger now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting seeing like the younger generation coming up now, and how that's sort of changing. There seems to be a lot of influence of the thing like Dommy and JD Beck are doing, you know, like incorporating the hip hop thing, which that is great. You know, I've always loved that sort of thing. And yeah, it's like there's a lot of kids in the college scene that are doing stuff, and you're meeting younger musicians. There's still a lot of people interested in jazz, for sure.
And it's interesting you say that because I did notice that there was a lot of cats out there that were doing kind of a mixture of what like a traditional hard bop kind of thing, but they were throwing electronica into it. It was like there was these elements that are going into it. And I think jazz has always been kind of moving into that modern realm. You all kind of represent a level of a sound of jazz that's different. And it's just so hard to put labels on everything. But I think overall, have you noticed too that maybe there's newer elements that weren't existing before, and it's kind of evolving into a more, I mean, because a lot of people had to up their production game. There was a lot of things that musicians had to learn because, you know, things were different. Are you noticing because of that upped production game that new elements are coming in?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are always influenced by the sort of current artists, aren't they? So, you know, there's people like Thundercat and stuff like that, and maybe he doesn't incorporate electronics so much, but there's always been that crossover from the sample culture. Artists like, you know, Flying Lotus, and you know, like Kamasi Washington doing stuff with
Mhm.
Kendrick Lamar, all that sort of stuff. Like it's a lot of kids now, you know, they haven't grown up listening to traditional jazz or Duke Ellington or whatever, unless their parents are really into it. And so it's natural that they want to sort of incorporate some of these things from more current worlds and bring it into jazz. You know, it's just trying to find a new path, I think.
And I think that's the beauty of GoGo Penguin is that you all are doing that, and there's a level of appeal that is going into younger generations, and you're chartering a very very solid path for people to really enjoy this music. So I've always dug it, and I love the electronica vibe, and I love the jazz. It's like you guys come together at with the perfect Oreo cookie, so to speak. So it's always refreshing. Um, but Nick, if anyone out there wants to know anything more about any live shows, best place to pick up the album, anything related to you and the band, where can they go? How can they find that out?
So for live shows, the website gogopenguin.co.uk. And if they want to see just us on the road and bits of silliness and what's going on, then Instagram's always a good place for that as well.
Okay, sounds great. Nick, thank you for taking time out. It's great to catch up with you again in these modern times, man.
Yeah, great to catch up with you as well. Hope
Thank
all's
you.
well. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.